Okay. Well, good morning, guys.
Morning.
Let's go ahead and pray, and then let's get started with the chapter 6, part 2 of the book of Ecclesiastes. Lord, thank you so much just for the opportunity we have. Thank you again for your word and the wisdom that it gives to us, and how it gives us proper perspective of how to look at how you have established and governed reality. Pray, God, that this would be beneficial and instructive and productive. And overall, Lord, you would be glorified. We love you so much, for it's in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, so we are in chapter 6. We will finish the chapter this morning. 12 verses in this chapter. Let's go ahead and review what we talked about last week concerning Ecclesiastes chapter 6, verses 1 to about 10. Um, Koheleth begins his discourse again with a couple of statements and a couple of examples. Starting in verse 1, there is an evil which I have seen or examined under the sun, and it is prevalent among men, right? The man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor so that his soul lacks nothing, yet God has not empowered them to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them, right? We talked about that in that statement. Then he brings up a couple of hypotheticals in verses 4 and 5, right? It seems Koheleth in his statement that here seems to suggest that a poor outlook is not relegated to a certain social class, status, ethnicity, or sex, that all people can have this perspective given the opportunity. That if one has a poor outlook, it's not just relegated to those who are just poor and lack resources. There are individuals who can be rich and wealthy and have a poor outlook on life itself, right? And as a result, it inhibits them from seeing things clearly. Also, too, Koheleth once more underscores the importance of focusing on the good, that is, things that are observed from God's point of view, Tob, in one's life and to live intentionally, all right? Uh, that a person cannot hold on tightly to riches, and that a person's personal satisfaction ought to be found in the good things, that is, as those things that are defined by God Himself. Koheleth, in an example in verse 6, he says, even if another man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy the good things, do not all go into one place. Koheleth underscores this a lot, talking about the futility of life, the finality of life, mortal life, physical life, right? Even if you had extended your life 2,000 years and you still had a poor outlook, you will pass away. So it is better to have a good outlook on things and live intentionally. Let's continue with this particular chapter 6, verse 8. For what advantage does the wise man have over the fool? What advantage does the poor man have knowing how to walk before the living? Let's take a look at a couple of words here, and then we'll tie this up and see what this means. The word for advantage is the Hebrew word yoter. This Hebrew word occurs 8 times in the Hebrew scriptures, 7 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, so it's frequently used here. Okay? It is translated as either more, over, or better, or advantage in my text. Okay? This word here particularly emphasizes an increase in quality or an addition to something. Okay? And depending on the context, this word can be used as an adverb, discussing more, noun as an advantage, what we just talked about, or a conjunction, moreover, as in emphasizing or adding more to the detail that's already there. Okay? In this case, Koheleth uses this word as a noun. It's an advantage, right? That verse, I believe it's verse 8. Yes, for what advantage does the poor man have, or the wise man have over the fool? Now, what's interesting here is that Koheleth uses this word yoter in the context of the same subject. Okay, in the previous chapter in the book of Ecclesiastes. If you can turn with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. He uses this in the same area. In the context of Ecclesiastes chapter 2, again, this is Koheleth's personal case study involving what he's done in his life, building vineyards, planting gardens, right? Getting servants, male servants and female servants, things like that. It's kind of racking up his own pleasure for the sake of it, testing and seeing whether or not living for pleasure is not a futile endeavor. I will start at verse 9, just for some context sake. It says, "Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was the reward for all of my labor. Thus I considered all of my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun." Verse 12. So I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. To what will the man do who will come after the king except what already has been done? Verse 13. And I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. Verse 14. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? Yoter is the word highlighted in red, or the word extremely here in this statement. This too is vanity, for there's no lasting remembrance on the wise man, as is with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten, and how the wise man and fool alike die. Right? So again, this rhetorical question which Koheleth has been asking all this time is to highlight a specific or particular point that Koheleth is making, specifically in chapter 6, verse 8. He continues this line of reasoning with the second one. For what advantage does the poor man have knowing how to walk before the living? Let's take a look at the word poor for just a second. This word poor is ani. It occurs 79 times in the Hebrew scriptures. Once here in the book of Ecclesiastes, it is translated as poor, or in some contexts, afflicted. The proper meaning of this word here is that it may underscore a person's lack of resources, or describes a person who has suffered holistically. And when I mean holistically, I mean physically, emotionally, cognitively, things like that. That a person who is poor. What advantage does the poor man, a person who either has a lack of resources, an inability to acquire these? They are not royalty. They're not king. They're not anything special, right? Knowing how to walk before the living. The word kalak is the word for walk. 500 times it occurs in the Hebrew scriptures, 17 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. It can be used figuratively as to walk around in a very, it could be used non-figuratively, I'm sorry, as to walk around, or figuratively in terms of one's position or outlook. This word is in the active stem, which means that this person is actively doing this. We've actually seen this word before in Ecclesiastes 2. Turn back there to chapter 2, verse 14. Verse 14, the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Now, it's not like everyone is walking in darkness. You can point to them and see that they're a fool. This is a picture, a word picture, an image to show that the fool walks in darkness. They have no wisdom. That's the point. The wise man's eyes are in his head. He can see clearly, right? But the fool is blind because they refuse to acknowledge the wisdom of God in their outlook, in their perspective. Okay? That's the point here. So going back to chapter 6, verse 8. For what advantage does the wise man have over the fool? Well, a lot, right? And what advantage does the poor man have knowing how to walk before the living? A lot. According to Koheleth in his rhetorical questions, Koheleth uses rhetorical questions often in this text as a literary device to point to a particular subject or thing that he's highlighting. Koheleth presented these rhetorical questions to the congregation of the nation of Israel as a literary device to underscore his point that the wise man has an advantage or more or a profit over the fool. And the poor man, even if he's poor, even if he has no resources at his disposal, can recognize how they ought to live. That's the point of the question. That taking all of the information into in the chapter 6, not divorcing it from chapter 6 verses 1 to 7. If a person has a proper outlook of life, even if they have meager resources, they still know how to walk among the living and make wise decisions. And that a person who is wise has an advantage over one who is a fool. Why? Because they acknowledge the wisdom of God in their outlook and their activity. Let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 6, verse 9. I will read it from my scriptures and then I'll read it from what's on the screen. What the eyes see is better than what the soul desires. This too is futility and a striving after wind. This is my kind of translation here. What the eyes look upon is qualitatively better than what the soul goes after. This is also useless and a striving after wind. What exactly is Solomon getting at, or Koheleth getting at with this statement? I thought we weren't supposed to live by sight. What is he talking about here? Well, he's brought up this particular point before. This is not anything new, right? In terms of living on the land, in terms of our activity, in terms of the things that we do here, having a proper outlook on the things we do, the activities that we complete is better, is though the perspective of God to focus on or focus from on reality as God has established it, rather than chasing dreams in life. There's a lot of that going around. Chasing your dreams, so-called. Well, God has given us the wisdom as to how to live and to what to do. He's given us the playbook already. We are to use that to focus on reality as God has established it. That's what he means by what your eyes see is better than what your soul desires, because sometimes what our soul desires isn't exactly aligned with the reality that God has established. That's why. Okay? As a matter of fact, he's mentioned this in the same chapter. Okay? Chapter 6. As a matter of fact, before we get there, I want to take a look at some things here. Let's go back to chapter 1 and kind of walk through some stuff here. He's kind of shared this already. Okay? Chapter 1, let's start at verse 6. He uses the cyclical nature of reality as Koheleth established it, using nature. Verse 6, blowing towards the south, talking about the wind, then turning towards the north. The wind continues swirling along on its circular courses. The wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are worrisome. Man is not able to say. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear is filled with hearing. That which has been, and that which will be, and that which has been done, and that which is will, and that which has been done is that which will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Verse 10. Is there anything of which one might ought to say, see, it is new? New and improved on your box of cereal is a lie. It is false. It is the same old cereal, right? Already it has existed for ages, which were before us. Why are we chasing things that we believe are new? They are not new. They're just something old with a new name, right? Already as it existed, which were before us. There are no remembrance of earlier things, and also of later things which will occur. Okay? Verse 15 of chapter 1. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. You cannot add anything to God's reality, nor take anything away from it. You cannot bend it. You cannot straighten it. You cannot change it. Chapter 3. Let's go to chapter 3. Verse 12. I know that there is nothing better for them to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees or examines good in all of his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that everything that God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it, and there's nothing to take from it. Man, that sounds familiar. That sounds like chapter 1. You can't break nature. You can't break reality. For God so has worked so that men should fear him. That which has been already and that which will be has already been. For God seeks what has passed by. You remember when we talked about that, right? That even God doesn't seek new things. God seeks old things, things that are already past. Why? If God is doing that, what should our perspective be, right? This is the same thing that Koheleth comes to. Don't chase dreams. Instead, live with the perspective of what God has already given. Which leads us to chapter 6, verse 10. What has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is. And that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. We've already kind of underscored this. Okay? Again, looking at Koheleth's statements, what has come to be has already been named. Koheleth underscores this concept in the previous statements in the book of Ecclesiastes. We already read Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 4 to 11. And we underscored chapter 3, verses 14 to 15, that there is nothing, that everything that God does will remain. To chase dreams is to chase our own imagination, our own machinations. To try to trace dreams to live great is one's imagination. For God has so worked so that men should fear him. That is the point. That is the point of all activity. That we raise our children, not because we're trying to create productive members of society, but that we fear God. We don't just love our friends because that's a good Nomachian ethical thing to do. Props to Aristotle. But we become good friends and have good ethics with our friends because we fear God. We don't just love our spouses because they create good family environments. That's a byproduct. No, we love our spouses because we fear him. That is the primary goal, the highest goal. We don't just go to work to be slave drivers for a boss. That's not the goal. We go to work because our highest priority is that we fear him. And the byproduct of that is all the things we get to enjoy. All of these things that God has established and are given to us for the activity done here on this land is from that perspective. And when we have that, anything could happen to us. And yet we will remain steadfast because our identity is not found in what we do or what we don't do, but that we fear him. Verse 10, continuing on, what has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he's not able to dispute with one stronger than he. Again, what does this statement mean? And it is known what man is. Koheleth also underscores this concept in previous statements in the book of Ecclesiastes. He just keeps repeating the same thing. Turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 18 to 21. We talked about this when we went through chapter 3. I said to myself concerning the sons of men, God has surely tested them in order to see that they are but beasts, for the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. He says the same kind of statement, very similar statement, in Ecclesiastes chapter 6, verse 6. Even if another man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things, do not all go to one place. The rhetorical question, the literary device that Koheleth is using, is to emphasize the main point that do not all go to one place. That place is the ground. It is the dirt. He says again, another similar statement in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10. summing up all of his research, he says this statement: whatever your hand finds to do, you do it with all of your strength or all of your might. For there's no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol, where you are going. All of us have a date with the dirt. This is what man is. Nothing but dust, a temporal physical life here on this side of Christ's appearing, right? If Christ does not appear, we have a date with the dust, right? And we can't change that. There is not a youthful cream on the planet that is going to prevent this. No amount of exercise, which is really good, by the way, but no amount of exercise is going to stop this, right? The fountain of youth does not exist here. Which brings us to the last statement in chapter 6, verse 10. Whatever exists has already been named, and it is known what man is, for he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he is. Now, there are some translators that believe that Koheleth is talking about God in this sense. Although I understand that, I don't think that that's what this statement means. I don't think that it's talking about God. But although you could associate it with that, I would not argue with this. Let me go ahead and give you a couple of words here in this text, and then I'll kind of draw out what I think is happening here. Let's look at the word dispute for a second. The word dispute is the Hebrew word din. This occurs in the Hebrew scriptures 24 times and occurs once in the book of Ecclesiastes, and that's here in chapter 6. The word is translated to judge, to contend, to plead. It's translated dispute here. And it's basically to strive in a rivalry or against difficulty, right? To contend with this, to fight against it, right? That's kind of the idea. So he cannot dispute, he cannot contend, he cannot fight, right, with him who is stronger than he is. One stronger is the word to quaff, okay? Not to quap, okay? To quaff. This word occurs 4 times in the Hebrew scriptures and occurs twice in the book of Ecclesiastes, okay? This individual who cannot contend sees that this individual is stronger than he is and refuses to do that. They cannot contend because of the fact that this one is stronger or overpowers or prevails over the one who is not. Now, this statement does not use the word Elohim. It does not use the word Elohim to refer to God in this statement. It doesn't say, for he cannot dispute with God who is stronger than he is. That would be clear. Okay? I believe that this statement is a how can I say this? It's a pithy quote. Okay? Talking about the establishing of reality. Now, of course, the source is God, but it's talking about reality itself based upon the 2 statements prior in chapter 10. What is it talking about? It's talking about what exists has already been named. You can't change that. I can't change that. Okay? It is known what man is. We are dust. We are frail. I can't change that. You can't change that. We're not strong enough to do that. We may fight against it by using different methods and devices, but we know at the end of the day, those are just reprieves, right? Slight delays of the inevitable. Just as a person cannot overtake or contend with a man that is stronger than he, a person cannot override reality itself. We can't live outside of this. We can't alter it. We can't change it. We can't torque it. We can't adjust it. We can maybe slow it down, perhaps, with things we do, but we can't overcome it. So I don't think it's talking about necessarily God being the strong man. Again, although if one wants to argue that, I would not have a problem with that. But I think that this is a pithy quote, a statement, a saying. A weak man can't overpower a strong man. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? Let's go to verse 11 of chapter 6. Because of the fact that we have this, Koheleth makes an interesting statement. He says this, for there are many words which increase futility. What then is the advantage to a man? Again, we see that Koheleth had some, again, very similar statements. Again, it's not like he's saying anything new. Once you read the book of Ecclesiastes and you kind of get the main points, he just kind of re-racks them. For instance, just a chapter over, in chapter 5, verse 3, he says this. Notice here the very similar statements or the very similar concept that he mentions in chapter 6. For the dream comes through much effort, and the voice of the fool through their many words. Notice again in chapter 6, he talks about the same subject, right? That to see with the eyes is qualitatively better than what the soul wants, right? It's very similar here. For a dream comes through much effort. If you remember what we talked about, dream here are harebrained schemes from the mind of men, right? Ideas and thought processes that we have, that we think are valuable, but they may not be. In Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verses 12 to 13. We see a similar statement, a similar concept or idea of Koheleth. It says, words from the mouth of a wise man are gracious, while the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of his talking is folly, and the end of it is wicked madness. Yet the fool multiplies words. No man will knows what will happen, and who can tell him what will come after him? Again, very, very similar statements here. So once more, Koheleth in chapter 6, at the end of his statement, uses a rhetorical question, again, as a device to emphasize his previous point, that multiplying words, that is not using words intentionally, speaking unintentionally, at the end of the day does not yield any advantage for a person. Lastly, we get to chapter 6, verse 12, which concludes our text here. For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime? During the few years of his futile life, he will spend them like a shadow. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? Man. So again, we see the conclusion of Koheleth's statement here, again, asking another rhetorical question, right? For who knows what is good, qualitatively good, for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his life, that is his futile life. Futile in the sense of you're going to die soon, right? He will spend them like a shadow. He will spend is the Hebrew word asa. This word occurs in the book of Ecclesiastes 59 times, which means that this is a main point of Koheleth. This word could be translated to do, to make, to commit, to keep, right? This is in the qual stem and in the yictul, imperfect, right? He will spend them like a shadow. He will continue to be active in these things. That is the activities that he has within his life. He will spend them all like a shadow. Well, I know what a shadow is. Hebrew word is sel in this context for shadow. It occurs in the book of Ecclesiastes 4 times. It could refer to, again, shadow or shade, when like a tree shades an individual with its shadow. It derives from the Hebrew word salal, which means to darken or to be dark. Right? So think about your shadow as the sun hits it, and it is dark by quality. This word could be used non-figuratively to refer to our shadows as we walk, or shadows referring to shade when the trees hit it, or it can be used figuratively. Do me a favor, turn with me to Psalm 144, and I will wrap it up with some final thoughts here. 144. You know, it's really kind of fun to kind of look at the historicity of some of these texts, because we know that Solomon is the son of David, right? And it's kind of fun to read Solomon's writings because you could see the influence from Daddy David that Solomon had. Let's look at Psalm 144, verse 1. And I'll read it to verse 4. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. My loving kindness and my fortress, my stronghold and my deliverer, my shield, and he in whom I take refuge, who subdues my people under me. O Lord, what is man that you take knowledge of him, or is the Son of Man that you think of him? Verse 4, man is like a mere breath. His days are like a passing shadow. Wow. Man is like a mere breath, Havel. He's here and he's gone. And his days, how he commences his days, are a passing shadow. They flee. So looking at kind of the context of 144 and going back to Ecclesiastes 6, what is Koheleth trying to tell us here in this text? In chapter 6 of Ecclesiastes, he will spend them like a shadow. They will be here and gone, just like that. For who can tell what a man will be after him under the sun? No one can, because they're gone. Now, this might make you feel bad if you read it, but actually, Koheleth's book is a source of comfort. Why do I say that? Well, let's take a look at some thoughts here. Koheleth continues in this chapter to inform the congregation of Israel about the reality of death and how short life is. Based upon these particular facts of reality, a person ought to have the proper perspective of life as they live here, and how to live intentionally with the life they have. This is the whole entire point of this chapter, as well as the entire book. Do not waste your life because you don't have a lot of it. Don't have regrets of looking back and going, man, I should have lived smarter. I should have lived more wiser. I should have made better choices. I shouldn't have did this, that, and the other. That's the point here. And to be honest with you, if reality is fixed and God has given us the manual to know how to live in a fixed life, then that means we don't have to question or guess how to live here either. That should be an amazing source of comfort to us. How many people do we know or have we seen? Man, I'm just trying to survive. I'm just trying to survive. I don't even know what I'm doing here. I have no idea. I don't even know why I'm here. I don't even know why I make the decisions or choices I make. I have no clue. God doesn't want us to live like that. God has fixed reality in a certain way, and he's given us the wisdom to understand that outlook. Koheleth once more underscores, again, as a literary device, the finite quality of the physical life of humankind, that no one can tell a man what comes after him because they will eventually pass away. Again, this should be a source of comfort to us. I don't think that the book of Ecclesiastes was written for us to be sad about these things, but to realize that even with the life that we have, that's very little, that's very short, that's very brief, we can still have hope with the outlook of making wise decisions while we live here. That concludes the end of chapter 6. Next week, we will continue with chapter 7. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for giving us the wisdom, not just the wisdom for the life to come, but the wisdom on how to live here with the proper outlook and perspective. So many individuals are looking for this. They're looking for how to live here, and they're chasing everything else but your wisdom. And it is leaving them havel, empty, causing them to ask questions like Koheleth is. What is the use of this? What advantage does this have? What does this profit me? Why am I even doing the things am I doing? And God, you, by way of Koheleth, have given us the perspective of how to live, even in a short life that we have here. May we continue to leverage and exploit this outlook as much as we can, as often as we can, so that we may have confidence, not just in the life to come, but in the decisions and the outlook while we live here under the sun. Thank you again so much, for it's in your son's name. Amen.